I used to think 15 years of loyalty meant something. Sitting in that sterile conference room, watching Jessica Martinez flip through the termination paperwork like she was ordering coffee, I realized how naive I'd been. The woman who built her career on my invisible contributions couldn't even look me in the eye. "Marcus, we need fresh perspectives for our next launch," she said, her manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany table. "Someone who understands current market trends." The irony was suffocating. 3 floors below us, the manufacturing team was packaging units of the Urban Minimalist collection. My design that had generated $4.2 million in revenue this quarter alone. The sketches were still in my desk drawer, time-stamped and signed, bearing the coffee stains from those late nights when inspiration struck at 2 a.m. "I appreciate the feedback," I managed, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Jessica's eyebrows raised slightly. She'd expected tears, maybe pleading. That's what she got from the last designer she'd discarded. I'd started at Meridian Creative as a junior designer, back when the company operated out of a converted warehouse and creativity actually mattered more than politics. Jessica was just another account manager then, ambitious but unremarkable. I watched her climb, meeting by meeting, taking credit for collaborative wins and distancing herself from any failures. The first time she stole from me was subtle. A logo concept I'd sketched during a brainstorming session magically became her idea in the client presentation. When I approached her privately, she laughed it off. "Come on, Marcus. We're a team here. Ideas belong to everyone." But this termination? This was personal. I thought about Patricia waiting at home, probably preparing dinner, and wondering why I was late again. She'd stopped asking about promotions months ago, sensing my growing frustration. "You work twice as hard as anyone there," she'd say, rubbing my shoulders as I hunched over weekend projects. Why don't they see it? Because seeing it would mean acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would mean sharing credit. Emily had asked me last week why I looked sad all the time. 16 years old, and already more perceptive than my boss. "Work stuff, sweetheart," I'd mumbled, but she'd seen right through me. Kids always do. "Marcus?" Jessica's voice snapped me back to the present. "HR needs you to sign these documents." Sarah Johnson from Human Resources slid a packet across the table, her expression apologetic but determined. Standard severance package, non-disclosure agreement, return of company property. Nothing about the hundreds of concepts sitting in their system with my fingerprints all over them. I signed everything without reading it. Jessica's relief was palpable. "Thank you for understanding," she said, already gathering her things. "Security will escort you out." Understanding. As if I understood why 15 years of dedication earned me a cardboard box and a lecture about market trends. As if I understood why my Urban Minimalist collection was featured in Design Week last month with Jessica's photograph next to it. But I did understand one thing she'd forgotten. I documented everything. Walking past my cubicle for the last time, I caught David Wilson's eye. My closest colleague for 7 years, the only person in that building who knew where the real ideas came from. He gave me the slightest nod, barely perceptible, but loaded with meaning. The security guard, a kind man named Frank, who always asked about Emily's soccer games, helped me pack my personal items. My family photos, the coffee mug Patricia had given me for our anniversary, and buried beneath some papers, a flash drive labeled insurance. Sorry about this, Marcus, Frank whispered as we walked toward the elevator. Company's making a big mistake. The lobby felt different during my final walk through it. Colder. The walls displayed enlarged prints of Meridian's award-winning campaigns, including 3 that originated from sketches I'd drawn in this very lobby during lunch breaks. My signature style was everywhere, credited to everyone but me. Outside, the afternoon sun felt harsh against my skin. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching people enter and exit the building where I'd spent the better part of my adult life. Some of them nodded sympathetically through the windshield. Others pretended not to see me. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. How did the review go? Emily has soccer practice at 6. I stared at the message, trying to figure out how to explain that Daddy got fired for lacking creativity, while his creative work funded the company's expansion into 3 new markets. The drive home was a blur of familiar streets and unfamiliar anxiety. Our mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks. Emily's college fund was healthy, but not healthy enough to survive months of unemployment. Patricia worked part-time at the library, barely enough to cover groceries. But as I pulled into our driveway, seeing Patricia's worried face through the kitchen window, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in years, I wouldn't have to watch someone else take credit for my work. I wouldn't have to pretend that team collaboration meant one person doing the creating while another did the claiming. Patricia met me at the door, her librarian's intuition reading my expression immediately. They let you go, she said. Not a question. I nodded, wrapping my arms around her. She smelled like the lavender soap she made herself, a small act of creativity in our increasingly corporate world. Jessica said I lack creativity, I told her, my voice muffled against her shoulder. Patricia pulled back, her hands on my cheeks. The woman who hasn't had an original thought in 5 years told you that you lack creativity? That's when I started laughing. Deep, cathartic laughter that bordered on hysteria. Patricia joined in, and soon we were both giggling like teenagers, holding each other in our tiny foyer while the weight of our financial future pressed down around us. Emily's key in the front door broke the moment. Dad, you're home early? She dropped her backpack and studied our faces. Are you guys okay? Daddy lost his job today, Patricia said gently. Emily's expression cycled through confusion, anger, and finally determination. Did they give you a good reason? They said I'm not creative enough. My daughter, this brilliant, perceptive girl who inherited her mother's emotional intelligence and hopefully some of my artistic vision, crossed her arms. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, she declared. You're the most creative person I know. As we sat down for dinner, Patricia's homemade pasta and Emily's animated stories about AP art class, I felt my phone vibrating insistently in my pocket. I ignored it through most of the meal, but the buzzing continued. Finally, Patricia noticed. Aren't you going to check that? I glanced at the screen. 7 missed calls from David Wilson. It's probably nothing important, I said. But something in David's persistence made me uneasy. We finished dinner, helped Emily with homework, and went through our normal evening routine. But that phone kept buzzing, and David's name kept appearing on the screen. At 11:30 p.m., when Patricia was already asleep and Emily was supposedly studying in her room, I finally answered. Marcus. David's voice was tight with excitement and something else I couldn't identify. Fear, maybe. We need to talk. David, it's late. Whatever it is, I've been recording everything. The words hit me like cold water. What do you mean, everything? Every meeting. Every time Jessica took credit for your work. Every strategy session where she presented your concepts as her own. I've got 3 years of evidence, Marcus. Timestamps, audio files, email screenshots, everything. I sat up straighter, my heart suddenly pounding. Why would you? Because I'm next, he said simply. Jessica's been setting me up the same way she set you up. And after watching what she did to you today, I realized I couldn't let it happen anymore. Patricia stirred beside me, and I lowered my voice. What kind of evidence? Remember the urban minimalist presentation last fall? I recorded the whole thing. You can hear Jessica asking you specific questions about the color theory, the target demographic, the manufacturing specs. Then, 3 days later, I recorded her presenting it to the board as her own revolutionary concept. My hands were shaking. David, this could destroy her, he finished, and save both our careers. But Marcus, there's something else. Something you need to know about tomorrow. Tomorrow, Jessica's presenting your latest concepts to Harrison Industries, the ones you finished the week before your termination. She's calling it her Fresh Perspective Initiative. The Harrison Industries contract. The biggest potential client in Meridian's history. Worth an estimated $12 million over 3 years, and Jessica was going to win it using the packaging designs I'd agonized over for 6 months. Can you prove they're mine? Better than that, David said. I can prove she had no input whatsoever. The client meeting is at 2 p.m. If we time this right. Patricia's hand found my shoulder in the darkness. She'd been listening. What are you thinking about doing? She whispered. I covered the phone. Fighting back. Her grip tightened. Good. David was still talking when I returned to the call. Marcus, are you in? I thought about 15 years of swallowed pride, about Emily's college fund and Patricia's faith in me, about every young designer who would face the same exploitation if nothing changed. I'm in. But David, if we do this, there's no going back. There's already no going back, he replied. Jessica made sure of that when she fired you for lacking creativity while planning to steal your work one more time. We talked until almost 2 a.m., planning something I never thought I'd have the courage to attempt. As I hung up, Patricia rolled over to face me. Are you scared? She asked. Terrified, I admitted, but for the first time in years, I'm not ashamed. The next morning arrived with unusual clarity. Patricia made coffee while I reviewed the evidence David had sent overnight. Audio files, email chains, design specifications, all bearing my original creative input and Jessica's subsequent claims of ownership. Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for school. Dad, you look different. Different how? Less tired. Like you used to look when you'd finish a big project at home. She was right. For months, I'd been carrying the weight of unacknowledged work, swallowed credit, and mounting frustration. Today felt like the first morning in years when I had a clear purpose. Can I ask you something? What would you do if someone kept taking credit for your art projects? She didn't hesitate. I'd prove they were mine and make sure everyone knew the truth. Even if it meant causing trouble? Dad, letting people steal isn't avoiding trouble. It's just postponing it while they get stronger and you get weaker. Sometimes 16-year-olds possess wisdom that takes adults decades to discover. David called at noon with final preparations. The meeting's still on. Jessica spent all morning preparing your presentation materials. She has no idea what's coming. Any word from Harrison Industries? Robert Anderson will be there personally. Marcus, this is our one shot. If we mess this up, we won't, I said, surprising myself with my confidence. At 1:45 p.m., I walked through Meridian's front doors for the first time since my termination. Frank, the security guard, did a double take. Marcus, what are you doing here? Consulting work, I said, which wasn't technically a lie. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt like ascending toward Judgment Day. David met me outside the conference room, his face pale but determined. She's in there right now, setting up your presentation slides, he whispered. Robert Anderson arrived 10 minutes ago. Through the glass walls, I could see Jessica arranging materials at the head of the conference table. She wore her power suit, the navy blue ensemble she reserved for major client meetings. Her confidence was evident in every gesture as she prepared to sell my creative vision as her own innovative thinking. Robert Anderson, Harrison Industries CEO, sat reviewing preliminary materials. A man in his 60s with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone unaccustomed to wasting time on mediocrity. Ready? David asked. I nodded, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. David opened the conference room door. Jessica, I brought our consulting specialist for the Harrison presentation. Jessica looked up from her notes, and her face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion, recognition, and finally, poorly concealed panic. David, what is Marcus doing here? Mr. Anderson specifically requested additional creative input, David said smoothly. Given the scope of this project, we thought it would be beneficial to have our most experienced designer available for questions. Robert Anderson extended his hand. Mr. Thompson, I presume. I've been looking forward to meeting the creative mind behind these concepts. Jessica's face went white. I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson. There seems to be some confusion. I developed these concepts as part of our Fresh Perspective initiative. Interesting, I said, accepting Anderson's handshake. Could you walk me through your creative process, Jessica? I'm particularly curious about your inspiration for the color palette in the premium line. The question was surgical in its precision. The premium line's color scheme had been inspired by a sunset I'd photographed during our family vacation to Oregon last summer. I still had the original photo, time-stamped and geotagged, along with the color samples I'd extracted from it. Jessica fumbled for an answer. Well, the colors represent contemporary market preferences for sophisticated earth tones. Contemporary market preferences, I repeated. Not personal inspiration, no specific moment or image that sparked the concept. Anderson's eyes moved between us, sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. Mr. Thompson, he said, perhaps you could share your perspective on these designs. I opened my laptop and pulled up the original concept folder. I'd be happy to. This project began 6 months ago when I was exploring ways to combine sustainability with luxury aesthetics. Jessica interrupted. Marcus, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let him finish, Anderson said sharply. I clicked through the design evolution, explaining each decision, each iteration, each moment of creative breakthrough. Jessica watched in horror as I described details no one could know unless they'd lived through the creative process. This shade of copper, I said, indicating the premium line's signature color. came from a sunset photograph I took at Crater Lake last August. I can show you the original image if you're interested." Anderson leaned forward. "Please do." The photograph appeared on screen. A spectacular Oregon sunset with my timestamp clearly visible. Below it, my color extraction notes and the first rough sketches bearing the same date. "Jessica," Anderson said slowly, "would you like to explain how you developed concepts based on Mr. Thompson's personal vacation photographs?" The silence stretched until David cleared his throat. "Mr. Anderson, there's something else you should know." He produced a folder thick with documentation. Email chains, meeting recordings, development timelines, all pointing to the same conclusion. Jessica made one last desperate attempt. This is clearly a collaborative effort. All our projects involve team input. "Ms. Martinez," Anderson interrupted, "I've been in this business for 35 years. I know the difference between collaboration and theft." He stood, gathering his materials. "Mr. Thompson, I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting, with you specifically." As Anderson left, Jessica slumped in her chair, the weight of exposure finally hitting her. "You have no idea what you've just done," she whispered. "Yes, I do," I replied. "I've just started telling the truth." The call came at 8:47 a.m. the next morning. While I was reading the Business Journal's front-page story about creative theft scandal rocks local design firm. Patricia had already left for the library, but not before circling 3 job postings she'd found online and leaving them on the kitchen counter with a note. "You don't need them. They need you." "Marcus Thompson?" The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight Boston accent. "Speaking." "This is Catherine Morrison from Morrison Design Group. I'm calling about a career opportunity that might interest you." Morrison Design Group. I'd been following their work for years. Innovative campaigns for Fortune 500 companies. A reputation for treating creatives like actual human beings instead of expendable resources. They were everything Meridian pretended to be. "I'm listening." "We've been watching your work for some time," Catherine continued. "Yesterday's events have simply accelerated a conversation we've been meaning to have. Would you be available for lunch today?" 2 hours later, I sat across from Catherine Morrison in an upscale bistro downtown, still processing the surreal nature of the past 24 hours. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of confident energy that comes from building something substantial. "Let me be direct, Marcus. We know about Jessica Martinez's pattern of appropriation. You're not the first designer she's exploited, and you wouldn't have been the last if you hadn't spoken up." She slid a portfolio across the table. "These are concept pieces from 3 different designers who worked under Jessica over the past 5 years. Notice anything familiar?" I flipped through the pages, seeing echoes of my own stolen work reflected in others' experiences. The same signature style elements, the same innovative approaches to color and composition, all credited to Jessica's creative vision. "How long have you known?" "The design community is smaller than people think," Catherine said. "We've been quietly documenting Jessica's behavior for 2 years, waiting for someone with the courage and evidence to take a stand." My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Jessica called in sick today. Word is spreading fast." Catherine noticed my distraction. "Your colleague, Mr. Wilson, spoke highly of you when we reached out to him this morning. In fact, we'd like to make offers to both of you." "Both of us?" "Senior creative director for you, lead designer for David. 40% salary increase for you, 30 for him. Full creative control, profit sharing, and most importantly, absolute protection of intellectual property rights. The offer was staggering. Not just the money, though that would solve our immediate financial concerns, but the respect implied in the position. Senior Creative Director meant my name on projects, my vision driving campaigns, my creativity finally acknowledged. There's just one thing, Catherine added. We need an answer by Friday. Harrison Industries has requested that you personally lead their campaign, and we'd like to present ourselves as your new creative home when we respond. I thought about Emily's college fund, about Patricia's quiet sacrifices, about 15 years of watching my ideas flourish under someone else's name. I don't need until Friday, I said. I accept. Catherine's smile was genuine. Welcome to Morrison, Marcus. Now, let's talk about destroying some industry misconceptions about creative ownership. That evening, Patricia and Emily threw an impromptu celebration dinner. Emily had made a cake with Dad's Big Win written in chocolate frosting, and Patricia had opened the bottle of wine we'd been saving for something special. So what happens to Jessica? Emily asked between bites of cake. I don't know, sweetheart. That's not really my concern anymore. But don't you want to know if she gets punished? Patricia and I exchanged glances. Emily had inherited my sense of justice along with my artistic eye. Sometimes the best punishment is just telling the truth and letting natural consequences happen, I said. My phone rang during dessert. Unknown number. Mr. Thompson, this is Jennifer Chen from Design Week magazine. We're running a feature story about intellectual property theft in the creative industry. Would you be willing to comment? 3 more calls followed during the evening. Local business journal, industry blog, even a podcast about workplace ethics. Word was spreading faster than I'd anticipated. Marcus, Patricia said as we got ready for bed, are you prepared for this to get bigger? Define bigger. National attention. Jessica fighting back. Legal complications. I'd been so focused on immediate justice that I hadn't considered the broader implications. Do you think I should have stayed quiet? Absolutely not. Her response was immediate and fierce. You didn't just fight for yourself today. You fought for every creative person who's ever been exploited. At 11:15 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was David, his voice tight with urgency. Marcus, you need to see this. Jessica just sent a company-wide email. What kind of email? Damage control. She's claiming you were a disgruntled employee who stole company concepts and is now trying to frame her out of revenge. The audacity was breathtaking. Even facing overwhelming evidence, Jessica was attempting to flip the narrative. Forward it to me, I said. The email arrived moments later, a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting. Jessica portrayed herself as a victim of a vindictive former employee, described our collaborative work as her mentorship of a struggling designer, and claimed my evidence was fabricated. But she'd made a critical error. In defending herself, she'd provided specific details about concepts that only the original creator would know. Details that directly contradicted her earlier claims about inspiration and process. David, are you seeing this? She just handed us the final piece of evidence we needed, he said. Her own words prove she knew intimate details about work she claims to have created independently. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Patricia answered the door while I was getting coffee, and I heard unfamiliar voices in our living room. Marcus, There are some people here to see you. I found two women in business suits, examining the design books on our coffee table. They introduced themselves as investigators from the State Labor Board, following up on complaints about workplace intellectual property theft. We understand you may have evidence of systematic exploitation at Meridian Creative, the older investigator said. What followed was a 3-hour interview covering everything from my initial hiring to yesterday's confrontation. They were particularly interested in David's recordings and the documentation we'd compiled. Mr. Thompson, based on what you've shown us, this appears to be a pattern that may have affected multiple employees over several years. We'll be expanding our investigation. After they left, Emily emerged from her room, where she'd been pretending to study. Dad, this is getting really big, isn't it? Seems like it. Are you scared? I considered the question seriously. 24 hours ago, I'd been an unemployed designer with a family to support. Now, I was potentially the face of an industry-wide conversation about creative rights. A little, I admitted, but mostly, I'm proud. That afternoon, Jessica showed up at our front door. I saw her through the window before she knocked, standing on our porch, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Gone was the power suit, replaced by jeans and a wrinkled blouse. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. When I opened the door, she looked up with red-rimmed eyes. Marcus, please, can we talk? Patricia appeared behind me, her protective instincts clearly activated. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything. Jessica and I sat in our living room, the same space where Emily had celebrated my new job just hours earlier. The contrast felt surreal. The company is collapsing, Jessica said without preamble. 3 major clients have pulled out. The board called an emergency meeting. I've been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. I waited for her to continue. Marcus, please, you have to help me fix this. Tell them it was a misunderstanding, that we collaborated more than you initially indicated. The desperation in her voice was striking. This was the woman who'd built her career on confidence and manipulation, now reduced to begging in my living room. Why would I do that? Because if Meridian goes under, 47 people lose their jobs. Good people who had nothing to do with this. It was her final manipulation attempt, and she'd chosen her weapon carefully. Jessica knew about my conscience, my tendency to consider collateral damage. Jessica, those people are losing their jobs because of your actions, not mine. You had 15 years to treat your employees with respect and integrity. I made mistakes. You made choices, I interrupted. Deliberate, calculated choices to steal from the people who trusted you. She broke down then, tears streaming down her face as the full weight of her situation hit her. I was so afraid of not being good enough, she whispered. The board expected innovation, clients demanded breakthrough thinking, and I'm not naturally creative like you. I panicked. For a moment, I felt something approaching sympathy. The pressure to perform in corporate environments was real, and not everyone possessed the same creative abilities. But sympathy didn't excuse theft. Fear doesn't justify what you did to me, David, and the others. Others? Did you really think we wouldn't find out? 3 designers, Jessica. 3 people whose careers you damaged for your own advancement. She looked genuinely shocked, as if she'd never considered the broader pattern of her behavior. I can make this right, she said desperately. I'll testify, admit everything, take full responsibility. That's not for me to decide anymore, I told her. The labor board is investigating. Design Week is running a feature story. This is bigger than just you and me now. Jessica left without another word, and I watched through the window as she sat in her car for several minutes before driving away. 3 months later, I stood before an audience of 200 designers, creative directors, and industry leaders at the annual Creative Rights Conference in Chicago. The keynote speech I'd never imagined giving was titled Protecting Creative Integrity in Corporate Culture. The past months had been a whirlwind. Morrison Design Group had won the Harrison Industries contract, with my concepts prominently featured and properly credited. David and I had settled into our new roles, working on campaigns that challenged us creatively while respecting our intellectual contributions. Jessica had eventually cooperated with investigators, providing testimony that led to policy changes at 3 major creative firms. Meridian Creative had been acquired by a larger agency after filing for bankruptcy, and the 47 employees Jessica had mentioned found positions elsewhere in the industry. The question isn't whether creative theft happens, I told the audience. The question is what we do when we discover it. I clicked to the next slide, showing a photograph of Emily's latest art project, a mixed media piece exploring themes of authenticity and recognition. My daughter taught me something important during this experience. She said that letting people steal isn't avoiding trouble. It's just postponing it while they get stronger and you get weaker. The applause was immediate and sustained. After my presentation, dozens of designers approached with their own stories of appropriation, exploitation, and the courage required to fight back. A young woman named Sarah introduced herself as a recent graduate facing similar issues at her first job. How do you find the strength to speak up when you're afraid of losing everything? You realize that staying silent means you've already lost everything that matters, I told her. Your integrity, your self-respect, your right to claim your own work. That evening, I called Patricia from my hotel room. How did it go? She asked. Better than I expected. Emily was right. This is bigger than just our situation. She'll be proud. We both are. Any word from the foundation applications? Patricia and I had established the Creative Rights Defense Fund 6 weeks earlier, providing legal and financial support for designers facing intellectual property theft. The response had been overwhelming. 12 new cases this week, Patricia said, including one from a young designer in Portland whose situation sounds almost identical to yours. After hanging up, I stood at my hotel window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. 2 years ago, I'd been an invisible designer, watching others claim credit for my work. Tonight, I was part of a growing movement to protect creative professionals from exploitation. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Saw your speech online, Dad. You're changing the world one design at a time. The next morning, I flew back to Portland to find Morrison buzzing with energy. Catherine had landed 2 new major clients specifically because of our reputation for ethical practices and authentic creativity. Marcus, she called as I passed her office. We need to talk about expansion. I settled into the chair across from her desk, noting the wall behind her now featured framed prints of my Harrison Industries campaign. My name prominently displayed as creative director. The Creative Rights Foundation has approached us about partnering on a new initiative, Catherine said. They want to establish an industry certification program for ethical creative practices. What would that involve? Companies would undergo assessment of their intellectual property policies, creative attribution practices, and employee protection measures. Those meeting standards would receive certification, potentially influencing client decisions and talent acquisition. The idea was ambitious, creating industry-wide accountability through market forces rather than just legal intervention. They want you to head the program, Catherine continued. It would mean travel, speaking engagements, working with legal teams to establish standards. And Morrison? You'd remain senior creative director, but with flexibility to pursue this initiative. Think of it as extending your creative influence into industry reform. That evening, our family sat around the dinner table discussing the opportunity. Emily, now a senior in high school and planning to study industrial design in college, was particularly enthusiastic. Dad, you could literally change how the entire industry works. It's a big responsibility, I said. You're ready for it, Patricia added. You've been preparing for this your whole career without knowing it. 6 months later, the Creative Rights Certification Program launched with 12 participating firms and waiting lists at design schools across the country. Students wanted to work for certified companies. Clients preferred ethical partners, and talented designers sought environments where their contributions would be protected and acknowledged. Jessica had started a small freelance practice, focusing on traditional marketing materials and slowly rebuilding her reputation through honest work. We'd never spoken again, but David occasionally updated me on her progress. She's actually doing good work, he'd told me recently. Simple stuff, nothing groundbreaking, but honest. I think the experience changed her. On a warm spring evening, I sat in our backyard watching Emily work on her senior portfolio. She'd inherited my eye for design, but approached creativity with a confidence I'd never possessed at her age. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret speaking up, making such a big deal about the whole thing? I considered her question while watching Patricia tend her garden, thinking about the hundreds of designers who'd contacted the foundation, the policy changes spreading through the industry, the young creatives who would enter a profession slightly more ethical than the one I'd endured. There's an old saying that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. I should have spoken up the first time Jessica stole my work, but I'm glad I finally found the courage to plant that tree. She nodded, returning to her sketches. I'm glad too. And Dad, I'll never let anyone steal my work. I know you won't, sweetheart. You're stronger than I was at your age. That night, as Patricia and I reviewed foundation applications and planned the next certification workshop, I reflected on the unexpected trajectory my career had taken. I'd lost a job I thought I needed and found a purpose I never knew existed. My phone showed 17 missed calls from design firms requesting consultation, 4 interview requests from industry publications, and a message from a documentary filmmaker interested in telling the broader story of creative rights in corporate America. Are you happy? Patricia asked, looking up from grant applications. More than happy, I said. For the first time in my career, I feel like my work has meaning beyond just aesthetics. Even though it's not pure design anymore? Especially because it's not pure design. Design without integrity is just decoration. What we're building now, this movement toward ethical creativity, that's design in its truest form. We're designing a better industry. 3 years after Jessica Martinez fired me for lacking creativity, I stood before the International Design Council presenting the annual Creative Rights Report. The statistics were encouraging. Intellectual property theft reports down 37% in certified firms, designer retention rates up across the industry, and a new generation of creative leaders emerging with different values about collaboration and attribution. But the most meaningful moment came during the Q&A session when a young designer from Seattle stood up. "Mr. Thompson, I'm working at a certified firm because of the standards you helped establish. My ideas are protected, my contributions acknowledged, and I've never had to choose between my integrity and my career. Thank you for making that possible." Applause. As applause filled the auditorium, I thought about 15-year-old Emily, now thriving in her sophomore year of design school, learning to create in an environment that valued authenticity over exploitation. About Patricia, whose quiet strength had anchored our family through uncertainty and change. About David, now creative director at Morrison and a fierce advocate for young designers. And yes, I even thought about Jessica, whose desperate attempt to steal one final concept had accidentally triggered a transformation that reached far beyond either of our individual careers. Sometimes, the most creative thing you can do is refuse to accept an unacceptable situation. Sometimes courage looks like walking away from everything familiar to build something better. And sometimes, justice arrives not as dramatic revenge, but as the quiet satisfaction of knowing your work, finally, truthfully, completely, belongs to you.